Hi all, thanks for coming back to the YouTube channel. Did a video recently about the Messerschmitt 109 and its pilots and tactics that was well received. And we were talking in that about the high altitude fighter bomber raids on London towards the end of the Battle of Britain, really, from sort of about the 20th of September onwards. And a lot of people expressed surprise at the height that these were coming in at, these fighter sweeps escorting these Jabos, the Jag bomber, which were 30,000 feet plus, 31,000 feet sometimes. And of course, from 20,000 feet in a Me-109, you can't bomb accurately. So those raids are very much about indiscriminate bombing of really the civilian population. It's not going to achieve a huge amount of damage, but it is going to stress fighter command, because those raids, they cannot identify whether there are fighter bombers in the formation. All RDF is going to tell you is the number of aircraft, and if they're above cloud layer, the observer corps is of no use in identifying the composition of the formation. So all of these incursions had to be intercepted, and because of the frequency of them, it meant that fighter command had to fly standard patrols between the sort of Biggin Hill to Maidstone and the Maidstone to Canterbury lines to bar the approach to London. Now, that was one thing, and somebody asked a very valid question, or raised the point that these were different attacks to some of the attacks on the airfield. And that's absolutely right. And in this, really, there were high altitude-ish attacks, not that high, but by Heinkels and so on. I mean, we look at the attacks on Hornchurch and Biggin Hill and Kenley. We'll look at those in detail later. Tangmere, of course, was heavily dive-bombed by the Stuka in August 1940. But what I just want to stick with this this thing about the dive bombing and the Me-109s and that sort of thing, and to start off by talking about the 24th of August 1940. Now, at this point, the Battle of Britain is entering its most critical phase for fighter command, and even Churchill said that between 24th of August and the 6th of September, the scales tipped in the Luftwaffe's favour. And this is the period when the airfields are being absolutely hammered. And indeed, they had been hammered even before that date. But on this particular date that I just want to focus on briefly, by now we've got the bulk of the Me-109 forces concentrated in the Pas-de-Calais. So that's putting England, southeast England, closer to them. So it's going to extend their range and give them longer for combat over England. So that's very important. And there's lots of skirmishing going on constantly between the two opposing fighters. And on that particular day, the first combat involved 85 and 601 squadrons that had a clash with JG51, and Sergeant Ronnie Hamlin of 610 scored his first success of the day in that action, and he'd go on actually to become an ace in a day on that day and claim 5 German aircraft destroyed. But the Germans are constantly over the Dover Strait, and the issue that then gives the 11 group controller is he doesn't know which of these raids is a feint, which is a spoof. And that's exactly what happened at 12:30. So there are 5 enemy formations identified between Dunkirk and Boulogne. But what are they doing? Are they going to strike out across the channel? Are they going to turn back? If they're going to strike out across the channel, what are their targets? It's impossible to say. And 2 of the raids were spoofs, and they turned back to France soon after they struck out across the channel. So this is a constant game of chess and cat and mouse, really, in a way, and trying to second guess what the enemy's intentions are. So one of the raids, which was 20 odd Junkers 88s of Kampfgeschwader 76, very experienced unit. Their low-level Staffel had hit Kenley hard on the 18th of August, the hardest day. and they're escorted by ME-109s of JG-51, and they head for Manston. Now, Manston's a very vulnerable target because it's on the coast, but having said that, it was a forward airfield, but it was not a sector station. So therefore, and it was a new station as well. So really, although it's easy to attack because it's by the coast, it wasn't really one of the primary targets actually. And this is another common feature of the Luftwaffe's effort in the Battle of Britain, is that they suffered from inadequate intelligence. But Manston's still a good target and it's easy to hit. So Junkers 88s are the best bomber the Germans had at the time. Fast, heavily armed, and there's 20 of these. And what are they going to do? They're going to dive bomb. It is designed to bomb horizontally and as a dive bomber. So these attacks by these ME-109s over London, which is a fighter, it's not a dive bomber at the end of the day, as neither was the Spitfire, although, or the Hurricane, but both were pressed into the fighter bomber role. And indeed, the 109 pilots of the fighter Geschwader had no specific dive bombing training, but these guys in these Ju-88s, that's a different matter. They are dive bombers, and they hit Manston hard. They hit Manston in high-speed dives from 4,000 feet, and at the time, 264 Squadron's Defiance had been patrolling for an hour from Hornchurch, and they decide, Squadron Leader Philip Hunter decides to land at Manston to refuel, and they're just taking off again just as this raid comes in. So the Defiance, this much maligned and by day certainly ill-fated turret fighter that had the same engine as the Merlin. Have a look on the channel. We've got a very popular video about the Defiant with my old friend Andy Long, who's writing an encyclopedic history of the Defiant. It's taken years. It's going to be an absolute must-have when it comes out, eventually published by Pen and Sword. But have a look at that because it explains a lot about the Defiant. But these Defiants, they're in the air, and it's impossible to attack these Ju-88s while they're in their dives. So Manston is bombed. Nothing can prevent that happening. But then there is skirmishing as the Ju-88s withdrew, and 264 Squadron claim several Ju-88s and Heinkel 113s, which is so amusing that throughout the Battle of Britain, Heinkel 113s are identified by fighter command pilots. But it was a prototype, and it was a clever propaganda ruse by the Germans that put this story out there that the Heinkel 113 was this new fighter that the Luftwaffe was equipping with, which it never did, in fact. These are actually ME-109s that are being misidentified, and aircraft misidentification throughout the Battle of Britain is a real mess, quite honestly. But the Defiant suffer three losses. 3 are shot down into the sea off Ramsgate, including the gallant squadron leader Philip Hunter. And the Defiant suffered, didn't it? But there was nothing the Defiants or anybody else could do to stop Manston being hit that day. A fast raid on a coastal aerodrome, dive bombed accurately. And I'll just read you this, which is from the Manston Station Operations Record Book. It says, 12:50 hours, a very heavy bombing attack was made on the station. There were 7 fatal casualties, and 1 enemy aircraft was brought down by ground defences. Living quarters were badly damaged, and the presence of a number of unexploded bombs made it necessary temporarily to vacate the area. Later, it was decided to evacuate permanently all administrative personnel and those not required in connection with station defence and servicing of aircraft. Accommodation for evacuated personnel was found in Westgate. So that's some significant disruption. Now, interestingly for me anyway, my hometown is Worcester in the West Midlands in the UK, and Worcester's an inland provincial city, and wasn't exposed a huge amount to the Battle of Britain or air raids generally. But we did have 1 fatal casualty, who was Airman Harry Burridge, who was on the ground staff at Manston, who was one of those 7 fatalities that day, and his grave can be seen at St John's Cemetery in Worcester. So there's a bit of a connection for me, and that goes on a bit further. That a 109 of 6th Staffel JG51 was shot down on that raid. Oberfeldwebel Fritz Beek, who force landed with his oil system all shot up in a field at East London, which is between sort of Dover and Deal, out that way, just near the coast. But that aircraft, there were a lot of photos taken of it after it had force landed, and it was later used to promote the Spitfire Fund. Now, I did a podcast, again, that should be on the channel. If it isn't, it will be soon, all about the Spitfire Fund, which was an astonishing thing. And that aircraft was used, carted around the country to raise money for the Spitfire Fund. And you paid sixpence or a penny or whatever it might have been to sit in the cockpit and have a butcher's at it. And I've got a photograph of it outside Worcestershire Hall, which is also the Crown Court. And as a retired police detective, I was in that building, fortunately on the right side of the dock, many times. So just a little interesting connection. So that was the first raid that I wanted to talk about. And then the other one is a raid on North Weald in Essex. Now this happened much later in the Battle of Britain, 29th of October 1940. So this is just 2 days before the Air Ministry decide that the Battle of Britain is over on the 31st of October. So this is the time when London is the constant target for these fast-moving, high-altitude Me-109 formations, just randomly, indiscriminately dropping bombs. And this day is no different, ostensibly. The first raid sweeps up to London at 10:25 hours and randomly drops bombs in Westminster, Kensington, Paddington and Lambeth, killing 4 civilians. So as these raids advanced, squadrons were patrolling in pairs, barring this approach to London again, and Douglas Bader and his 12-group Duxford wing, they're up over Hornchurch, so north of the Thames. And, you know, it's high-energy stuff, this, and there are so many of these raids coming in, the pressure is really on. And the 5th raid of the day is an attack which appears to be aimed at Hornchurch and or North Weald. And this is all Me-109, so no Ju-88, just Me-109, so it's moving very fast. So this is going to be moving somewhere between 300 and 350 miles an hour, very fast from the Pas-de-Calais. It's going to cross the channel very, very quickly. And at 1640 hours, these 109s arrive over North Weald, and it's a specialist bombing unit, 2 Gruppe Lehrgeschwader 2, who are trained dive bomber pilots in the 109, and they approach from the southeast and accurately dive bomb the aerodrome from 3,000 feet. And as those first bombs fell, another 12 attack from the north side. And while these bombs are dropping, there's a section of 249 Squadron and 257 Squadron's Hurricanes taking off. And Sergeant Girdwood is Yellow 2 of 257 Squadron. His Hurricane's blown into the air, and the poor chap is crashed in flames just by the northwest perimeter of the aerodrome, and he's killed. And the Polish pilot officer Franek Surma of 257 Squadron gets off the ground while the bombs are exploding, but then he is hit by a 109 that's flown by Hutman Gerhard Schupfel, who was an experter and the Gruppenkommandier of 3 Gruppe JG26, that was one of the escorting units on that raid. If you look at the video about the Me-109 and the German pilots in the Battle of Britain, Gerd features in that. Very, very interesting, and one of the lesser known aces. So Surma is shot down, and he then bails out. His Hurricane crashes into a sandpit near now the Bobington Nature Reserve, south of the village of Morton, near Matching in Essex. And then there's lots of tales about this, because the actual 257 Squadron records say that he lost both of his flying boots jumping out of the aircraft, got a black eye, but was otherwise unharmed. But he had to convince the Home Guard that he was a Pole and not a German, and he was then given 2 whiskies at the pub and driven back to the aerodrome. Now, in Larry Forrester's Tuck biography, Fly for Your Life, there's a yarn in there about Surma wearing a German flying jacket from a bomber he'd shot down in Poland. Well, he didn't shoot a bomber down in Poland for a start, and he was mistaken for a German. There were a load of Free French soldiers in there that were going to lynch him, until Tuck, who wasn't flying that day, turns up in a car, and as Wing Commander Tuck wrote to me in 1987, put a stop to this nonsense. But I don't know, there's nothing in any of the eyewitness accounts, people who were at the pub, about that, so the jury's out as to whether that wasn't a bit of embellishment. But nonetheless, this fast-moving raid, bang, 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 dive bombs North Wheel, blows up a Hurricane, there's another Hurricane damaged, Surma is shot down shortly after he takes off, lucky to climb sufficiently high to bail out safely, and it's a shambles. So again, to read from the station operations record book, the ME-109s dived to about 3,000 feet and lower, and about 44 bombs were dropped, about 27 falling on the camp, mostly on the landing ground. The guard room, just rebuilt after a previous raid, was practically demolished. A bellman hangar, already damaged, was virtually destroyed, and a 30-ton lorry and a mechanical crane therein destroyed. Several huts at Dispersal Point were destroyed or damaged, and a Magister was destroyed. Despite damage to the landing ground, it remained serviceable for day flying, and none of the telephone services or gas or water were affected. In all, there were about 6 fatal casualties and a dozen more injured. 2 large bombs fell on open ground near the officers' mess. And I remember Air Commodore Pete Brothers, who at the time was a flight lieutenant, a flight commander on 257 Squadron, bemoaning to me the fact that his Lagonda got absolutely full of soil from those exploding bombs, which it took him forever to clean out. But anyway, I'm sure that was the least of his worries on the day, in truth. But those aircraft, there was more fighting as they withdrew. But you can see these are successful attacks. And they are very different to these random, indiscriminate, high-altitude fighter-bomber attacks on London. So it was an interesting point that was made in the comment section of the YouTube video about the ME-109 tactics. And if you've got any other comments, any feedback, please leave them in the comment section below. We've got lots of videos coming. I think I'm going to stick with this theme of the airfields being attacked, because there were so many of these attacks. Also, a bit of a fallacy perhaps about the fact that the airfields were on the knees when the Germans turned away to attack London. Not exactly true. If they would have been on their knees had the attack continued, but certainly by changing strategy and going off to bomb London, that gave Fighter Commander reprieve in that respect. But the main thing was that by going to bomb London with Heinkel 111 bombers and so on and so forth, Dornier 17s, it meant they had further to fly over England, and that gave Fighter Command more opportunities for interception. But that's all for another day, because we're going to talk about the bombing of London in great detail in due course. So I hope you found that interesting. I don't think there's much written really about these fighter bomber attacks, and you know, Battle of Britain always seems to be more about September and the bombers and London and all of this. So I'm very keen to look at the whole picture, and particularly some of these lesser known aspects. So I hope you've found it interesting. If you do, and you like what we do, lots of podcasts, lots of videos coming. So please subscribe to the channel and join our community. Any comments welcome. Thanks very much.